Maurice Pitzman was a surveyor who surveyed the street and laid it out. 1888, street dates back to 1888. And there were several businessmen who formed a corporation basically to lay out both of these streets. They wanted to get away from mid-city where there was a lot of smoke and that sort of thing, and factories are moving in that area. So when they moved out here in 1888, the Cabanne Dairy Farm, it was a dairy farm, and they bought this pristine piece of property, which luckily, was adjacent to Forest Park. Forest Park was only laid out. It was laid out in 1876, so it was just 12 years later. This was like going out to the country back then. But there were several people in the railroad business, in shoe manufacturing, finance, and real estate who built these original homes. One of the more well-known owners was Dwight Davis of the Davis Tennis Cup. His whole family lived, his parents had built a house on Westmoreland Place. His brother built a house next door to them, and then he built a big house here at 16 Portland Place. And it still has his original clay tennis court from 1910. And then he also helped develop tennis courts and ball fields, etc. in Forest Park. He was very much into athletics. Then he became the United States ambassador to Russia and moved from here. I believe that was probably in the 20s. So it was sort of interesting. He's one of the well-known ones. One of the Cartier family members built a house on this street. The Adolphus Busch, the original founder of Anheuser-Busch, gave number 1 Portland Place to his daughter as a wedding present in 1910. And so that was a very famous one. That's a magnificent house. And the Catlins, 2 Catlins lived on Westmoreland Place, and they owned the American Tobacco Company, and they made a fortune in the tobacco business. So there was all sorts of different owners on these 2 streets, and they each built their own version of whatever they wanted by way of a house, which is kind of neat. Well, number 1 Portland, the Faust House. Lily Bush married Edward Faust, who's a very well-known restaurateur in St. Louis. They went on a European trip and bought lots of beautiful tapestries, but they didn't have enough room in the house, which is amazing because it's huge. So they added an addition onto the house called the Tapestry Room, which is a 2-story tall room, and it looks like a medieval Italian castle, and hung all the tapestries there. So they had put an addition on the house just to hold their tapestries, which is sort of neat. And it's still there, it's still in use, it's a magnificent room. It depends, because the houses were built here basically from 1890, or 1889 was the oldest house. And I think the last house was built in the 1950s. It was a replacement for an original house. So I would say probably in their day, they cost $100,000, which was a lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just amazing how much money that was back then, in the late 19th century. And today, they're going up to $1.9 million to $2 million, depending on the house, that sort of thing. So it's kind of interesting what's happened over the years. But that was a lot of money back then, when an average house, just a normal house, could be built for $5,000. So, and of course they use materials like this paneling in this room, the granite that's on the exterior of this house. A lot of those things just cannot be replicated today, because they just don't even have some of the woods that were used back then. And it would be cost prohibitive. You just simply couldn't afford to build something like this today, which is what's kind of neat about these. Because these are on private streets with indentures, they were able to be saved during a time when people either didn't want them or couldn't afford them at some point. But on both streets, there are probably about 12 houses. Today, it's all national, part of the National Registry of Historic Places, so you couldn't remove them today, thank goodness. And some of the ones that are gone are pretty cool. They're all different, which is unique to these streets, because many times in a private street in a development in some cities, they're very similar in style. Here, everybody built whatever they wanted to. You have Gothic revival houses, you have French chateau style, you have Georgian houses. The replacement house down the street is mid-century modern, which is unusual. So their styles vary just depending on what they wanted, which is kind of neat. And Romanesque, with those, the house down at number 40, which looks very much like Union Station, big arches, big stone house. That was a Richardsonian Romanesque style, of which there are not many residential houses like that left in St. Louis. This house is more of a Gothic style. It's unusual. It has pink Missouri granite exterior, which is really kind of unusual and neat. And it has beautiful plaster strap work in the ceiling. All this, it's called strap work, with all this pattern going on in here. And the paneling here is just amazing. So this is sort of a Gothic style house. And you see it also in the pointed windows, sort of a Gothic peak. And it's unusual. This one's unusual in that it's pink granite.
Yeah.
There's one other one on Westmoreland Place, it's pink granite, but it's Italianate style. It was an Italian Renaissance style. So it's interesting, you use the same materials but have different architecture. It's a private street with indentures, which is why these streets still survive today. Streets further east, like Vandeventer Place, which is gone, it was bulldozed, didn't have indentures that were this strict. So people would take these houses at a certain time, probably in the 30s and 40s, and divided them up into apartments and that sort of thing, and destroyed the houses, it ruined them. And then they were too far gone to restore. So that's what's really saved these streets during a tough time, after basically following the Depression. And a lot of people who had a lot of money lost it during the Depression, and didn't want the upkeep on these homes. So the gates originally were open, but they're gatehouses, so there would be a somebody at each gatehouse to let people come in that way. Today they're gated just because it's much better to let kids play outside, that sort of thing. But the indentures is what really saved the rules and regulations about the use of the houses. They had to remain single-family private residences, and that really saved the day, thank goodness. So these would have been gone too. Vandeventer Place, which was a lovely street off of Grand Avenue, right across from Powell Hall. The VA hospital is now on top of what was Vandeventer Place, unfortunately. So these two streets, in my opinion, are what I call the jewels in the crown. These are the two best private streets in the city itself. And it's incredibly well preserved. And, thank goodness people like the current owners have taken this house and really given it lots of love and care. And they're now better than ever because of that. And I think people realize there are X amount of these houses, there will never be any more. And now they've become much more valuable. Once upon a time, they were considered sort of old-fashioned, and so people didn't really care as much. Now they realize they were old enough to be outdated at one time. Now they're old enough to be really appreciated and preserved. So it's kind of nice to see 125 years later how well kept these homes are, preserved, which is nice. It takes a special person to live in one of these and take care of them. But I think people who live in these homes now just cherish them for the architecture and the quality of materials and that sort of thing. Well, I do know past presidents who have visited neighbors on the street. President Ford, President Reagan, George Bush, number 41, President Clinton, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher was also a guest on the street. So they've had some interesting guests here over the years. So interesting. You know, all these houses had carriage houses, and they had horses and groomsmen and that sort of thing. So back in the day, you'd have groomsmen, you'd have coal delivered, ice delivered, that sort of thing. It was like a little city, its own private little city, which is just great. And you can still keep horses if you would like, because it's private. I used to have horses at my house at number 7 Portland Place, and I would ride them in the park. So you can still do that. And some of the houses still have the original horse stalls in them, which is really cool. It's like they just, you know, horses are out grazing someplace and coming back in any time. It's really neat how those have been preserved. These two streets really are kind of unique in the United States. There's not a lot like these. These are sort of like the houses in Newport, Rhode Island, etc. And having the green parkway in the middle is wonderful. That just gives you a great sense of space and privacy, and these beautiful trees, you know, make a big difference. And that's kind of great. It's funny if you see old pictures of the street, it was just a field.
Yeah. It's
just kind of amazing to see. And back in the day, this was the end of the streetcar line. You'd stop at Kings Highway in Maryland, and you'd head east into the city from here. It's kind of neat. This street, the people who built these houses, basically their children moved west to Clayton and built houses like in Brentmore Park and that area, and Carswald. And then their children moved further west and built houses in Ladue. So it's sort of typical of St. Louis progression, basically from the riverfront west. Now, the grandchildren are coming back, which is kind of neat. A lot of people from various parts of the country come here, and they're just like amazed at, like, we didn't know this, which I think is kind of neat.
Yeah.
They thought sometimes we're one of the flyover states, and they kind of think there's not much here. When they see it, they go, oh my goodness. Great place to live, great place for families to grow up in, and oftentimes you'll see several generations of a family living in one of these houses. You know, these will go on another 150 years because of the way they're built and the way they're cared for. And that's what's really neat about it.
And that was Portland Place.